everyone, welcome to a new episode of It's Lit, it's Dalck. We're gonna go with a new lesson today, and as you can see, we're gonna be talking about, we're gonna be studying Alexander Pope's poem From the Rape of the Lock. Now, it's called From the Rape of the Lock because the original name, of course, is The Rape of the Lock, but this is a very extensive poem, all right? This is a very long poem. And we're just going to see a very short section of it. That's why we're calling it From the Rape of the Lock. We're just going to work with an excerpt of this super famous and interesting poem by Mr. Alexander Pope. Let's get ready to the lesson and let's start with our essential question, our first activity. Let's see what you guys think. And of course, we have done this before in class, or you can do it in the comments below in the video. The question is, how can satire change people's behavior? All right, because you don't know what satire is, it's just a very specific type of writing in which you want to criticize, you know, trying to be hurtful, but criticizing intelligently. What it's mostly used for is for social elements of hierarchy, all right, like the government or institutions. When you want to mock, when you want to make a criticism, but you want to make it elegant, and you want to make it ironic, and you want to make it sarcastic, so you use a satire, which is a specific kind of writing. The question is, do you think satire can change people's behavior? Just let me know your opinions in the comments, and of course we're going to do these in class, and then we're going to go to the next part of this activity, and I will ask you to think of a time when you overreacted to an incident but later realized that what happened was not very important actually. What made you see that you had actually overreacted, right? We're also going to have, or we have just had that conversation a few minutes ago in the class itself. Of course, you can leave me down there in the comments your opinions and your answers to these two questions. So let's get on and start with the theory that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. Now, of course, as I was saying, we have to know what satire is first. We're going to analyze it, but we have to know what it is. So, it is a literary technique, all right? A satire is a literary technique in which institution, practices, or behaviors are ridiculed for the purpose of bringing about reform. The idea is to use this technique in popular text. I mean, texts that everyone has available to read in order to create a change in their minds by ridiculizing institutions, practices, or behaviors, social behaviors, okay? Authors write satire to comment on social and political issues and to advocate for improving society. The idea is not just be harmful. The idea is not just to be critical, you know? The idea is to bring changes and positive changes by being satirical. Satire is not only used in literacy, but in literature, but it can also be used in television, in YouTube channels and opinions. It can also be used in movies, etc., etc. Right? So it's a technique for writing, but it can be applied to any different other media, even music. Okay. Satirists, okay, which are the writers that specialize in writing satire, they often use exaggeration and irony to cast a critical eye on human follies and shortcomings. The success of satire depends on readers' ability to distinguish what is stated from what is really meant. There are so many different examples of satire that have been misunderstood or misinterpreted that they end up in a whole chaos. All right, because the readers or the receivers of this specific type of information, they are not quite capable or able to decode the message behind it. If you take a satirical text into the literal range, you're either going to be scandalized or you're going to be like super aware, super alert what's going on. But when you finally understand the message behind, which is ridiculizing an action, ridiculizing an institution or a person or a decision, then you understand what the message was. It's actually an elevation of sarcasm, but with the purpose of bringing a positive change. That's how I personally would define satire. And yes, it has very specific elements. Number one, ridiculing customs, behaviors, or institutions. Okay, you can write a satire about the government, a satire about the social security institution. You can write a satire criticizing the actions of a president, etc., etc. Right? But again, the second element is that it has a specific purpose, and that purpose is to improve society, to bring people down to a thinking in an actual change in behavior in order to be better. Third thing is that it intends to be humorous. All right, that's why it employs different writing techniques, not only the general satirical style, but it will include sarcasm, irony, humorous language, comparisons, etc., etc. A lot more. All right. Yes, it uses exaggeration, because what other way will the reader have in order to understand that what is written is not literal, right? We have to be super exaggerated, extrapolate the information in order for the reader to catch the idea behind it by just reading something that seems to be humorous and fun, right? Now, there are two types of satire. They are named after the Roman satirists, you know, the ones who invented it, Horace and Juvenal. Of course, they're called Juvenalian and Horatian. Juvenalian satire uses sketching, scornful tone and a very dark humor to criticize incompetence or corruption with scorn and outrage. That means that the language is just very harsh, okay? It's a very rude language. It may sound really disrespectful, okay? And we're also going to read an example of Juvenalian satire when in the next lesson after we read this one, we're going to read something called a modus proposal. And you're going to see the difference, because first we're going to read the rape of the lock, which is the one that we're starting now, which is again an example of Horatian satire. But then a couple of weeks from now, we're going to read the Juvenalian example, which is a modus proposal, which I think you guys are going to enjoy a lot. Right? So again, a modus proposal, it's an example of Juvenalian satire. It's something that is it was very criticized at its time. It was really impressive. People got impressed. And then when you understand the meaning behind it, you realize, oh, this is what it's about. It's social criticism. Right? It's a social critique that the author is making in order to create something, a change in the people around it. On the other hand, as I was saying, the rape of the lock is an example of Horatian satire, which uses a playful, lighthearted tone to correct foolishness and vice with a combination of gentle mockery and sympathetic understanding. It's still fun. It still has the elements of irony, exaggeration and criticism behind it, but it's not as harsh, it's not as toxic, we could say these days, as the Juvenalian satire. Okay, you can see in this chart how the purpose is to improve society in both of the two types of satire, but the Horatian is light-hearted. It's just like reading something just ironic, all right? But then you see the Juvenalian satire is a lot scornful, it's more harmful, it's more, not harmful, harsh, It's filled with dark humor. You know, what happens if we kill everyone? So would we be happier? No. So that's a lot of dark humor in the Juvenalians, whilst in the Horatian satire you will find some more gentle humor, like light-headed jokes, you know, comparisons. What are you, this or that? All right. So this type of humor that is a lot more gentle than just dark and harsh. All right. Again, as I said, the examples are for Horatian, the one text that we're going to be reading, which is a poem, an excerpt from the poem, The Rape of Dalck, which is really interesting, and you're going to see how I cannot spoil the story because the story in the poem is actually very funny, but you will see how a simple act of indiscretion will also help the writer to communicate a bigger theme behind it. On the example of Juvenalian satire, we're going to be reading A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift, which I think you're going to be surprised of what we're going to be reading there. All right. Next up, we're going to focus on the use of language, but we're going to go very specific into this one. All right. We're going to analyze this technique that is called a heroic couplet. A heroic couplet is a pair of rhymed lines in iambic pentameter. We were studying Shakespeare last time, all right, last period. And the word iambic pentameter will not be new for you guys, all right? An iambic pentameter, I will explain again, is a metrical pattern of 5 units, 5 feet, all right? Each foot consists of 2 syllables. The first is unstressed and the second is unstressed. So, an iambic pentameter will be a line that has 10 syllables. It doesn't matter the number of words, but it has 10 syllables. When you read an iambic pentameter, remember this is one line. When you read an iambic pentameter, let me just highlight it here. All right, we have 2 examples here of an iambic pentameter. So pay attention here. Each of them have 10. Each of them has 10 syllables. Every pair of syllable is called a feet. A foot. So an iambic pentameter, it's called pentameter because it comes from the word penta, 5. It means that each couple of syllables is a foot. So it has 5 feet, sorry. That's an iambic pentameter, a 5 feet line. But remember that each foot has 2 syllables, and those syllables has to be the first one unstressed and the second one stressed. When we combine 2 iambic pentameters, we have a heroic couplet. That's it. All right, so basically a heroic couplet is a pair of lines in iambic pentameter, just as it's described right there. Now, what is the purpose behind that? Well, Pope's adherence to the heroic couplet structure creates some of the unusual syntax in this poem, The Rape of Dalck, and he uses surprising rhymes for a humorous effect. Now, we have to keep into consideration all the different elements that we're talking about with this poem. Yes, number one, it's a poem, so it will have rhyme, it will have a pattern, it will have rhythm, yes. It's also reading using the satire technique, which, what does it mean? That the message behind it is a social critique, all right? So, think about the surface, which is the words, the letters, the rhythm, all right, the arrangement, but also think about the deep, which is the message behind it. That's where the satire comes. We're going to see exaggerations, we're going to see irony and sarcasm, all right? Again, this is Horatian satire, which is not as powerful and harsh as the Juvenalian, but that also serves the purpose of the message, okay? We're going to be analyzing both cases, the deep structure, the messages, and the surface structure, of course, the elements like heroic couplets, iambic pentameters, rhythm, intonation, stress, syllables, etc. So we have some work to do, and of course we're gonna do it together, all right? As I was telling you, in the deep structure, we are going to analyze the mock epic, all right? And what is a mock epic? The Rape of the Lock is an example of a mock epic. It's just mocking, all right, with an exaggeration, something that was supposed to be not that important. Okay, so yes, a mock epic is a form of satire that uses a grandiose style of epic poetry to portray a trivial subject. That's what I've been saying since the beginning of the video. All right, it's something that seems simple, but it is exaggerated in such a delightful way that it becomes epic. And yes, we are making fun of this because it should not be as big, but we're gonna make a mock epic in order to satirize a specific subject behind it. The mock epics include formal language, of course, supernatural intervention in human affairs, boastful speeches, that means very, using very sophisticated words, and of course, elaborate descriptions of weapons and battles to emphasize the subject's insignificance, right? Just to give you a practical example, it would be running out of your battery on your phone, right? But when you describe what happened, you are so deeply depressed that you don't want to see the windows of the world because now you don't have access to the most important information from your beloved friends through Instagram because you cannot turn your phone on. So yeah, that is, making it epic, just mocking a simple act as, running out of battery in your phone. In The Rape of the Lock, Pope uses elevated language. And this is what somehow is going to, I know it's going to give us a little bit of work because elevated language means super sophisticated language. He includes diction, which is the word choices, and syntax, which is the word order, in order to shape the reader's perception of how a woman reacts to something simple as someone cutting off a lock of her hair. What is a lock of the hair? Just a piece of hair, right? To better understand difficult words and unusual syntax in the poem, we have to use side notes provided for historical background and unfamiliar words, also use dictionaries, references, thesauruses, etc. We want to visualize the action and images, and we want to paraphrase sentences with unusual syntax by rearranging the words in a more familiar sentence structure. Yes, we're going to see the words used so very randomly, but that has a purpose, and the purpose is to make them fit the iambic pentameters and the heroic couplet structure. When we see those words that are like weirdly organized, for example, that we have here in elevated language, hither the heroes and the nymphs resort, right? That has really strange word choices. What's a nymph? What's the verb hither? All right? And why is the word resort at the end? So yeah, it has strange word choice and strange diction and also strange syntax because the arrangement of the words, the verb should be here after the subject, etc. When we paraphrase it, we make it simpler so we can understand better the idea. So the men and the young women gather here. That's it, right? Hither means to come together. That means to gather. All right? The heroes and the nymphs, it means boys and girls, men and women. That's it. So hither the heroes and the nymphs resort. That's just boys and girls come together here. That's it. All right? Yes, we just have to give it a couple of times, looking for words. What's the meaning? What can they mean? And then rearranging that in paraphrases. We're going to do that in class. Of course, we're going to be practicing all of that. All right, guys. Basically, that's all the work we're going to be doing with the rape of the lock. We're going to analyze why it is a satire. We're going to analyze this theme and the message behind it. We're going to go into the structure, but clearly the specific structure with iambic pentameters, heroic couplets. We're going to analyze diction and syntax, and of course all of that's going to give us the first part of analyzing satire, which will we continue in a couple of weeks with the next reading. That's going to be a modus proposal, and we're going to have fun with these two readings, which are going to be our next classes. For now, thank you very much for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like, leave a comment, and of course activate your notifications so you can get all of my new classes every time I submit one. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.